This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
An inside look at the creation of the suburban school districts tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. We are joined tonight by John Etkin from the Collierville School System, Superintendent. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for
being
having
back.
me. Appreciate it.
Also, Bill Dries from the Memphis Daily News. And you're the first of the municipal new superintendents in the newly formed school districts that we've been able to have on. We'll have the others on over the coming weeks and months. But you have been here before in a different role. People who kind of look and say, "Okay, it's kind of familiar." You used to run the Shelby County suburban when there was the school district in the suburbs. It then merged with the city. Then you're now in Collierville.
It's been an interesting few years, hasn't it?
I bet. Yeah, we were talking before the show. You were about to move into your new offices for the Collierville School District in an old place where you used to teach 31 years ago.
Right. Looking forward to it. The town of Collierville, and I've told everybody that we've discussed this, have been so supportive of the efforts to start the school system, and they've kind of given us temporary space. And as we've hired folks in central office, we've been at the town hall and using every available empty cubicle in the building now. But the town, as part of an acquisition a couple of years ago, now owns the historic building, the old Collierville High School, and so our permanent offices will be there.
And so you are creating a school district, a new district, out of a bunch of existing schools. I mean, the saga is well documented on this show and in the paper and so on. But what you took the position, I believe, in December.
Right.
August probably doesn't seem that far away.
It seemed far away in December. It seems real close now.
What has to be done between now and then to open schools successfully under a new banner, under new leadership?
Well, a lot of things we're involved in this settlement with Shelby County Schools and the County Commission. Obviously, the turning over of the buildings that happens June 2nd. But initially, right now, we've gone through policies, and you have to have new policies for new school districts. You have to do all the branding, as we discussed earlier, framing those policies for the new district. Probably the most important thing that we've been dealing with the last couple of months is trying to estimate how many kids are going to be in the schools based on some enrollment nights and registration numbers, because that drives our budget. Worked with state officials on trying to develop the funding process, had conversations with Shelby County officials, the trustee, on how all the money flows and those types of things. But then ensuring, all the teachers' rights are protected as we move into this. Teachers' rights are protected by state law. So as we move forward, we have to ensure that we're doing everything we can for the teachers in the buildings that currently exist. If they choose to remain a part of Collierville Schools, then there are some things that we have to ensure to make sure that we're following the law. And
you've touched on a whole lot of things that we'll dive into. Many of the things you just mentioned. I want to start with your communication, your cooperation with the Shelby County school system, what people sort of think of as the old city school system. Has that been good? Has it been difficult?
Yeah, it's hard because, and I wouldn't say good or bad. There have been great communications in some cases, but I think both of us now are dealing with the inevitable that they've got a lot of things to do, as well as they're trying to figure out numbers and teacher projections and all of that, and we're doing the same thing on our end. So it's become more of the 6 municipalities working together, probably more so than dealing with Shelby County Schools. But there've been good communication, because there are a lot of good folks there that I worked with, so a lot of good relationships still exist. But there has to be some cooperation in exchange of data, student files, employee files as we move forward, personnel files as we move forward. So those types of things are progressing well.
Yeah. Bill.
And in the run up to August, which will be here before we know it, the 6 suburban school systems are going to do some shared services, but I don't think this is quite what people are thinking about, like as in you'll all have a common kitchen to serve lunches and things like that. It's a little bit different.
Yeah, it is, and I think probably what we've tried to do is some of the core business services that aren't in the classroom per se or at the school building, affecting curriculum and those types of things, that where we can hire some people with knowledge I'll give you an example we discussed the other night, transportation. I mean, we're going to have to have a transportation model, probably an outsourced vendor as Shelby County Schools is moving to as well. But then we hire the people to do the routing, and we share that among the 6 municipalities. So those people with knowledge of the system that can coordinate that. We talked about nutrition a little bit the other night, our student management system, those people who can manage it, purchasing, payroll, where you'll have some common people who can do some bulk buying and some bulk bidding that can save some money, and then push those processes out to the 6 municipalities.
And as we talked about on food, then shared services means that each school will still have its own kitchen.
Right. Each school will prepare their own food. The shared services personnel will help with menu planning, the bidding, the commodity piece of it, making sure the USDA regulations are followed, all those types of things, working with the kitchen managers. But each school will have their own kitchen, and the people in the kitchens will prepare the food.
And there's a sense that there's uncertainty maybe about, for some kids, some parents, where, so for parents watching the show or kids watching the show, for everyone in Collierville, do they know where they're going to be?
Yes, they should.
They should, and it should all be settled. I mean, because there's got to be a lot of anxiety from parents saying, until we know, until the schools are officially taken over in June, is something going to change? Am I not going to be able to get in? And I think there's probably a lot of uncertainty, or where I've read and heard about the most uncertainty is kids in unincorporated Shelby County, families and kids, and where exactly that falls. So, talk about attendance zones and the confidence parents should have in Collierville, but again, also with people in unincorporated Shelby County who are now attending schools in Collierville.
Right, and I think each municipality will be the same, with the exception of Millington. Millington, in their agreement with Shelby County Schools, did keep part of their reserve areas. The rest of us 5, and I'll talk particularly Collierville, when the agreement was reached, it guaranteed seats to students who live in the town limits of Collierville. So if you live in Collierville, you are guaranteed a seat at a Collierville school. Okay. In our case, our attendance zone for Collierville High School is pretty easy. It's the inclusive boundary of the town of Collierville. Right. We have 2 middle schools. And then 5 elementary schools. So we had to do a little adjusting, particularly on the west side of Collierville, because now and currently, Shelby County Schools, students in Collierville, we had about 1,000 students in Collierville that went to schools in Germantown, particularly Houston High and Houston Middle School. So we reached an interlocal agreement for that particular group of people that for 3 years, those students who are currently at Houston Middle and Houston High could stay there if they so chose, and Germantown will provide transportation. And then we worked out an interlocal agreement where they'll use our bus facility, our fueling facility, and then we'll offset the cost. Unincorporated areas, particularly the North Reserve and the South Reserve, and a pocket of unincorporated that went to one of our elementary schools, are not guaranteed seats, but they can apply through what we call a non-resident application. Yeah. And it prioritizes, similar to what we used in Shelby County Schools for years, where priorities are given. Teachers and employees who work in our school system, they're protected by law. They have the right to bring their child to that school. And then we move down those priorities. Priority number 2, if you're currently enrolled. Priority number 3, if you have a sibling currently enrolled. And we will work down those priorities depending on space.
And those are roughly the same priority lists that have been in place before this?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
And well, let me go to Bill. Let's go to Bill.
You think basically when this is all settled, you're going to have about the same head count in the 8 schools that you had before?
I think it's going to be pretty much the same, maybe a little bit more. If you look at the initial feasibility study that was done, where the initial foray into this was educating everybody currently there. Mm-hmm. That was about 7,500 students for us. When you exclude anything outside the boundaries, it dropped it to about 7,100. But we picked up an additional one for like exit grade kids this year. An 8th grader now who might have gone to Houston High next year now will come to Collierville High School. So it will kind of balance out. And then those plus the non-resident application where there's room, I think you're going to get back up to the 7,600 range.
And you all, Collierville did not want to put in place an out-of-town tuition. It was in Germantown at one point, I believe, passed that they were going to charge some kind of rate for people out of town. Then they went back after a lot of pressure and said they weren't going to do that. You can make the money work, the budget work
we can.
with this kind of, without a fee or tuition.
A resident of Shelby County, if they are granted enrollment, will not have to pay a tuition fee. If you're outside Shelby County, then some tuition fees do come in, but
Okay.
inside Shelby County, no.
Okay, and you talk about the high school and the one high school and the simplicity of that, but it is been talked about that Collierville is going to start planning for
Sure.
a new high school some years down the road, I assume, but you want to get planning now. The funding for that in this new world, how does that funding happen? Is it partly from Shelby County coffers and partly from Collierville coffers? I mean, how does the funding work?
Kind of up in the air right now. I know there's a lot of stuff going on about capital funding through the Shelby County Commission and some things going on with Shelby County schools. The way the money flows, we still receive money from Shelby County coffers through the trustee's office, the property tax, the sales tax on an ADA basis.
Okay.
As part of the referendum to approve a school district, each of the municipalities' residents had to say, I want to start a school district, but in so doing, I want to pay a 15-cent equivalent of the property tax. That is what is required by state law. And so our town in Collierville, the voters decided to impose an increase in sales tax. So the town has to, in our case, town of Collierville, a minimum contribution of 2.1. That's in the general budget each year. They can give more, so as you move forward, but right now they have to give 2.1. The capital needs would have to be addressed in some other ways, either through county commission capital money if we get to that far, or the town would have to issue bonds, increase property taxes, any of the above that can accommodate that request.
You mentioned that the Shelby County Schools put through, and Bill, one of you will know whether it was passed, about a $52 million capital plan. Some people are a little bothered by that. That all that's going to go to the Shelby County schools. And because of the timing, the municipal schools couldn't really get a piece of that.
Right.
Was that a fair situation for them to go get that $52 million?
Of course, I would say I don't think it's fair. But
I love that honesty. I love see, this is the difference maybe of an elected official, because when elected officials come on, they kind of dance around. But I like that answer. I like that answer.
And understand. I do understand both sides, but no, I would think that every municipality would want their share. And quite honestly, it has not passed as of today. Millington, I'm understanding on the initial request, is going to get money for a new roof, and it's in a municipality. There was some talk about Lakeland. As we move forward, we've got some capital needs as well. But when you're financing and you're all in the county and your voters in the county, and you're going to be the ones
Right.
footing that note for whatever you've contributed to the taxes for that capital money, sure, I think it would be
Right.
fair that each would get a piece of that.
So do you envision in the future that you and your other, folks from, Dorsey Hobson from the city and the other people from the municipality, you're all going to kind of line up at the county commission and say, hey, we need a new roof, we need a new school, and there's going to be that sort of complicated negotiation
Absolutely.
between.
That hadn't changed
yeah,
much.
okay.
I mean, that's kind of the way it used to be.
One point of clarification back, you said that the city would the city of Collierville, town of Collierville, would be putting in 2.1. What was that? 2.1%.
$2.1 million
2.1 million
each year.
each
That's what the 15-cent equivalent
Got
of
it.
property tax would raise in Collierville.
Okay, Bill.
What's the competition been like for teachers among all of the school districts and including the charters and other institutions outside of the demerger?
Hadn't seen much of that yet, and quite honestly, it looks as if we issued employee intent forms to the teachers in our schools, in our 8 schools, just gauging their intent, that if they were offered employment, would they choose to stay, or are they going to retire, resign, move, stay with Shelby County Schools? And 99% indicated that they want to stay in Collierville schools. So now we're basing enrollment numbers, and we'll circle back around and give a firm employment offer. Hopefully the first week of May is what we're shooting at now before the end of school. But we have to know get a good grasp of our enrollment numbers, because obviously that drives your budget and your staffing. But our folks out there are bought into the schools. Many of them live in the community. They want to stay where they are. It goes back to the plan that we had to submit to the commissioner and follow state law, that we have to protect their rights. So by protecting their rights, their salaries and their benefits packages are protected. And in a simple term, that means in a formation of this district by law, we cannot pay them next year any less than what they're making now. They can be paid more. We have to ensure a comparable health insurance package, a comparable life insurance package. All those things that go into employment rights, we have to protect next year.
Has your board had the discussion yet about Common Core? Because I think as we tape this show, the legislature is trying to wind up but it's still talking about whether we have I think the latest version was a 1-year stand down on the testing part of it. What's the discussion been, if any?
There has not been much on Common Core. I've got some people on my staff already that have been training part of that leadership council, and I think you probably have to just weigh the facts and the fiction on Common Core. I get more pushback and will probably receive more on the testing piece of that, and the frequency of testing and the volume of testing and how many and all of the impact that it has, more so than standards. Tennessee, Common Core and the standards, I have no issue with. I mean, we put a lot of money into training. Our teachers, our administrators have been trained. It's all of the high stakes testing that accompanies that and the things that are happening along with it that I think that the legislature is struggling with. And I probably anticipate seeing something on the last day and the last hour of the session.
Yeah,
That'll be helpful.
Yeah, and,
You can plan
that's
for it.
certainly what it looks like. They were
Right.
supposed to possibly adjourn Tuesday. We're doing this on Wednesday, and they're still in session.
Yeah, we'll go back for a second to the teachers and the pay. You talked about the transfer of them. Going forward, so they can't be paid less, they can be paid more. But is that a 1-year transition? And then for the, what would that be, the year after that, then it's kind of, all right, we can look at our budget. And is that what you don't know what your budget's going to be. It gets back to that, right? Because you don't exactly know how many students, and you don't know exactly, what your funding will be. Or is it fairly certain?
Yeah, we're fairly certain, and a lot of that was some cooperation with state officials. Our funding from the state is fairly certain because they made the decision. Usually you base it on the previous year's enrollment, and that gives you your estimate for your state BEP funding. So there is no previous year's enrollment for any of us in the municipalities. So they made the decision to base our BEP funding on current enrollment. So they took the April enrollment number where we are now, and that's going to be our projected BEP estimate. So we've got a pretty good handle. It came in remarkably close to the projected budget from the feasibility study. It was quite amazing how close it was.
There's a lot of talk, kind of moving away from the specific issues with the merger, demerger, and all that, that nationally there's a big wave of teachers who will be retiring, baby boom era teachers, and I mean some studies have said that there's just this big group that is ready to go and maybe even delayed a little bit because of the recession and their retirement plans or whatever weren't where they wanted it to be. Do you look ahead, you're trying to get things open by August, but you're also, some part of you is probably trying to look ahead 5 years and 10 years and planning. Where do you see teacher hiring going, teacher pay going? I mean, is it going to become more and more competitive, not just with the other municipalities or with Shelby County schools, but just generally as a profession? Do those salaries continue to grow? And does that become something that you have to manage?
Yeah, and it's definitely something we're going to have to manage looking forward. And all of the accompanying things, I know the city and the county are wrestling right now with the same things that we have to face as school district with all your retirement, your health insurance benefits once teachers retire. So all of those things, we're looking 3 and 4 years down the road how to manage that liability. But teacher pay, I think teacher pay probably has not risen with inflation and everything else as it should. I'm all about paying people for the job. Teaching to me is, I used to call it a noble profession. They would probably disagree with that sometimes because I think it's the most rewarding profession that you can do, and you want to reward people. The national wave is to reward for performance. So I think a lot of what we're going to be driven by is going to be based on many of the things that they do in Nashville. Are they going to tie teacher test scores to their pay and things such as that? So what we're doing is our litmus test is to look at what is being offered in Shelby County schools this year as far as salaries. And that's steps and lanes that some are under, push them right to the next, their place on that chart, and then evaluate moving forward depending on enrollment, and then we'll have to make some decisions.
It is interesting, I've said this before on the show, that there was so much change coming from Nashville at the same time that this demerger was going on, that sometimes there was some confusion, that some of the changes in the way the teachers were paid were blamed on the merger, but it really wasn't that. It was changes in collective bargaining, and it was this movement you're talking about. That, for instance, there was a time when if you got your master's, that just turned into a certain amount increase, regardless of your performance. Would you like to see more and more performance-based pay, as you just talked about?
I struggle with that, Eric. I really do. I'm a big proponent in furthering your education, but I also understand there's a lot of research that depending on which side of the wagon you want to hitch, which side you want to hitch to, There's research that shows that a master's in educational administration and supervision does not necessarily make you a more effective math teacher. So a lot of the things that we were moving toward are, masters in your field and things that are going to improve your teaching. That's one side of it. Another side is any education is good education and can make you a better leader, teacher, person. So we had a big discussion about that. We meet regularly, weekly, with the 6 municipal superintendents. This was actually a topic of our discussion yesterday, is how we're going to frame it once we get past this year. So those discussions are there, obviously depend on budget.
Yeah. Bill?
And you've talked, John, about Collierville is a little bit different than the other municipal school districts, especially the ones that share pretty significant borders with Shelby County schools, because that all came into play. It didn't come into play with Collierville, mainly because the relationship was that everybody was focused on was the relationship between Collierville and Germantown in all of this. So that's kind of made things more stable in some cases than in the other school systems, but it's also, I think it's certainly had its own challenges too.
Yeah, and the agreement with Germantown, we had to navigate a few things there, and I appreciate their board and our board willing to step up, because that is what was best for families for the next few years. And that was, I'm wrestling with the superintendent of Collierville. I spent over half of my career at Houston High School, so I knew the families, knew the neighborhoods. So we were navigating a lot of things there. But that I think that's really going to work out well for both of us. David Stevens at Bartlett, you'll have him on probably at a future date. He's really grappling right now with his attendance zones, because they do share a lot of borders with the city of Memphis, some unincorporated areas. He's got an unincorporated area right across from one of his elementary schools that 400 or 500 kids would be zoned to a Shelby County school when they can walk to Bartlett Elementary. So those situations he's probably having to struggle with a little bit more in decisions. But ours, if I were going to look at ours, has probably been the most stable, to plan and gauge future enrollment, sure.
Right, and obviously the agreement involving Houston High School is for 3 years, so nothing in this is set in stone for the rest of time.
Right. We've learned that.
Yes.
3 years is a long window.
It is. I think, looking back, and growth is going to drive some of that. If you get a huge growth in Collierville, here we talked earlier about the high school and planning that. All of those things are going to have to be put in a big package and planned out. But, there's nothing to say they might not want to come back and look at extending the agreement. Who knows? It kind of just depends on how we move forward. But right now, I've laughingly said we're going to get operational, so our key right now is getting school started, and then we can get aspirational and do some things that we want to do.
You talked about meeting with the other municipal superintendents, who we will have on the show over the next weeks and months. You ran that whole district, so do they look to you, although you don't have a formal role with the Bartlett School District, and say, hey John, how'd you handle this? And
sure.
Hey, how do I get those lights turned on? And how, is there that? Are you a resource to them beyond being the superintendent of Collierville?
I think so. I think they would tell you that, but they've been a big help to me, because these are the people that a lot of 5 of the 6 are obviously from Shelby County Schools, and 4 of them I had some real close ties with, and we bounce a lot of ideas off of each other. So yeah, I would they probably call me grandpa sometimes.
Well, and from that perspective too, you ran the Shelby County School District, and there was fierce, loyal defenders of that district, and people did not want to combine with the city, and all that's happened. But as you look at it now you're in charge of a smaller school district, Collierville focused. Is Collierville better off with a local controlled, Collierville-centric school district than they were with a 6 municipality school district? Is that a better trend for them in the end?
Yeah, I think you've probably got a combination of things going on. Yes, probably. I think the voters overwhelmingly said in each municipality that they wanted that control, and that control meaning they have a voice in their neighborhood, and that they can walk up to at the grocery store and get some input and and get some feedback from them on how the school district. I think that's the big piece of all of this, is how it went down. But what I've learned in a short time here is, and when you're a superintendent of a large school district, as I was, you've got people who kind of can do some of the little things and bring them to you for approval and review and discussion. Now many of those decisions are done by a smaller group, including me. So getting down in the weeds a little bit more with some of the planning and the policies and those pieces are, on me now and my staff.
Just a minute and a half left, Bill.
We've talked a lot about what changes and what doesn't. The intervention strategy that we've seen in all of our schools has really changed the character of it. That, I take it, continues.
Sure, it does. And, we were at the forefront of that when all the merger stuff started. I don't know if you were at a TPC meeting when we kind of lined out what we're doing in response to intervention now is a state-driven model that we all abide by. And, it's just catching kids and, evaluating them on the front end and assessing them on the front end, seeing what their needs are and working with those pullouts if necessary. But I think that's the basis of what we do educationally everywhere now, sure.
Does it make education more labor intensive than it once was?
Yeah, it probably becomes more data driven probably, where you're going to have to rely on data and use some things that you heretofore wouldn't do. And when we all went to school, that probably wasn't around. We took one test probably during the year, and then when we got to high school, we took the ACT test, and that drove everything. But it's more data intensive. I don't know about labor intensive, maybe more planning intensive.
Just 30 seconds left. Your name was in the running for the Shelby County, the full school district. Any regrets that you didn't end up in Dorsey Hobson's seat? Gotta ask.
That's a great question. I told somebody the other day that life has some unusual twists and turns, and I think mine worked out real well.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. Good luck getting the schools open on time. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.